really you're supposed to be thinking the whole time, right, during worship. But I'm going to need a little help. So I need you to try to remember what decade these things happened or were popular. Poodle skirts. 50s, okay, easy. Gulf War. 90s. Martin Luther King Jr. 60s. Charles Lindbergh. 20s. Okay, the Rubik's Cube. 80s, yeah? How about when was the Slinky invented?
The what? The Slinky?
Slinky, you know, goes
70s?
40s. He says, yeah, 40s. The Great Depression.
30s.
Yeah, 29, 30. The Smurfs were not reruns. The 80s. Bouffant hairstyles? Bouffant hairstyles? The 60s. Hula hoop? 50s. All right, how about when did Jesse Owens win 4 gold medals in the Berlin Olympics? 30s, yeah. 36. Nixon resigned? 70s. Space shuttle exploded?
80s.
Yeah. Last one. And this all just totally influenced all of our lives. The waterbed became popular.
70s?
The 70s, yes. Okay, so those are all things that sort of define a cultural time, right? Often we understand an era based on significant events or inventions of the day. So the reason I'm asking you to think about all of these things is because today we celebrate Christ the King Sunday. And within our cultural understanding, we don't really care so much about kings. Unless we happen to be playing like knights with our child. And I think we've probably all heard by now that king language just doesn't work so well for us anymore. Because as Americans, we don't have a king, right? And if there is any cultural understanding, if we have any type of cultural understanding about kings, it is that we have fled from that type of authority over our lives. Because today is all about the I. It is all about me. It is about the iPad, the iPod, the iPhone. It's about what the individual can do. Certainly, it is not a culture that is about a king. And dare I say, it's most certainly not a culture which is about a king named Jesus. Whether we call him king or ruler or servant or Messiah or shepherd or Lord and Savior, no matter what we call him, for many, probably including some of us on various days, this culture is not so much about Jesus. So the common alternative to today's naming of Christ the King is Reign of Christ Sunday. Supposedly, this should remind us that God rules over all. And while it may be a little bit more politically correct, it still seems as if the things which reign supreme are credit cards and movie star shenanigans and Starbucks. Today we don't begin sentences with, in the year that King Josiah reigned, or in the year that King Uzziah died, or in the first year of Cyrus, the king of Persia. We don't do that. We talk culture. We talk in terms of the age of Atari, or the era of Elvis, or the legacy of Steve Jobs. That's why I had you think about all those things at the beginning, because when you recalled those, you were immediately transported to a time, right? You laughed, or you were sad, depending on what it was. Because it was a way that things were. It was a way of being. So I say all of this in order to propose to you you that today should actually, in fact, be called Culture of Christ Sunday. And I actually think Jesus would prefer this title, because that's what he was all about. Changing the culture. Changing the ways in which people interacted with one another. And changing what they placed value. It wasn't a top-down approach, but it was rather a pervasive societal way of being. See, we say that today is all about the individual. We say that it's a situation of this generation, but it isn't only today. Because if you look at the story today, Jesus is angry because of why? Because whole nations thought only of themselves. They fed themselves and not others. They welcomed those that were like them and looked warily on the stranger. They made sure they had health care and medicines, but left others to fend for themselves. It was all about the I then, too. Since the fall of the world, it has been all about the individual and the individual seeking to save themselves. Now, truthfully, I must say that this sheep and goats metaphor gives me a little bit of the heebie-jeebies, but mostly it pains me. Because life as I have known it, and I'm sure as you have known it, is not nearly as clean-cut as Matthew seems to make it out to be. So when I read things like this, and I'm sure you have the same experience, I struggle through some of Jesus' words. I struggle through the extremism of them. And that is what weighs heavily on me, the extremeness of them. The sheep and the goats, you're either in or you're out. It's black and white. It's extreme. And I think, I wish life was that clean. The fact of the matter is we live and breathe and place our whole beings on the grace side of God. Even though we sometimes fail. And even that is extreme, that we can do that. So the extreme words get my attention. I sit up and I take notice. The fact of the matter is, if we look at any culture, we know that culture experiences swing wildly from one end to the other. And we sort of do this innately. Like if you think about hairstyles, right? One cultural, the 80s, it's big hair all over the place. And then the next culture, or the next decade, will be smooth, tame, manageable hair. Jesus' point here may not be for us to squash the extremism of it, but to ask what kind of extremists are we going to be? Are we going to be extremists for hate, or are we going to be extremists for love? Could it be that this abject extremism is at the heart of becoming a culture for Christ? If it is, then it's feeding the hungry all the time. And it's clothing the naked all the time. And quenching thirsty all the time. Because these stories today of the sheep and the goats are powerful reminders of how God's economy looks. And a culture of Christ is extreme. This year, I received a lot of requests from school counselors to assist families who need help with Thanksgiving and Christmas. And all these families live within 2 miles of this church. 11 families. That's a lot for a small congregation. But how do we say no? How do we say no with those words of Jesus ringing in our ears? Truly, I tell you, just as you did it to the least of the ones of these, you did it to me. I mean, it's a lot of beans and a lot of corn and a lot of turkey. And it's a lot of shopping, but we all hardly a lot of toys, a lot of mittens, and a lot of books. It's a lot. But it's also a lot of smiles. It's also a lot of laughter and a lot of joy and a lot of love. Frankly, 11 families, at minimum, is 55 faces of Jesus. When we meet them, we can be sure of two things. The first is that they will be blessed by Christ. And the second is that we will be blessed by Christ. It would be really easy for us to give up. Not just as a congregation, but as Christians. We often feel as if culture is something that's done to us, as if we have no choice in what is actually happening and going on in the world around us. And there is some truth to that, but I think it's also vital for us to remember that culture is generated. It is continuously formed. We make it. We don't like it, then Jesus is calling us to change it. What would it look like if we weren't moderate? And I'm not talking political ways, but we weren't moderate. I'm not asking you to jump out of an airplane with me, though that could be a good time. It'd be an interesting worship experience. But I'm not asking you to do that. But I am asking us all to love in the extreme, to love exponentially, to the nth degree. Once we decide to be extremists for love, instituting this culture of Christ, then there's no place we can look where there isn't somebody that's hungry, and there isn't somebody that's thirsty, or somebody that's sick. Because the very culture today is hungry. I'd say that our societies are the way they are today because they are so hungry that they filled up on the wrong things. And they're starving for living bread and wine that quenches the thirst of forgiveness and peace. And we have that bread. We have that wine. Jesus didn't call his disciples to moderate discipleship. Moderate disciples would have stayed in Jerusalem, they would have stayed safe in their temples, and they would have accepted the known culture. And they didn't do that, because Jesus wasn't a moderate. He was extreme in every way, the way he lived and in the way he died, and calls us to do the same thing. Wouldn't it be cool if in 15 years, a pastor stood before us and said, "Okay, tell me the decade in which these things happened." Clean water was readily available worldwide. And we would answer 2012. Employment rate equaled 100%, and we would answer 2012. Violence of poverty ceased to exist, and we answered 2012. Malaria was eradicated, and we answered 2012. What if we no longer mark time by hairstyles and presidents and wars? What if we marked time by how many we fed, and how many we loved, and how many we cared for? And what if that time is upon us now? Now, I know that you may be nodding your head a little bit and saying, well, that's a great theory, Pastor. And we can certainly buy a few cans of beans, but what you're proposing is impossible. And it might be impossible if I was the one proposing it. But I'm not. Jesus is. And he believes it's possible. And I'm not going to argue with him. So I'm just going to leave you with this fact, this truth, this hope. And you tell me it's not possible. Did you know that every year we spend $450 billion on Christmas? And did you know that it would take $20 billion to give the entire world clean water? That's extreme love. This could be the year of the culture of Christ. Amen.